It was late summer 1955, just outside a small farming town in western Kentucky. Our unit had been ordered to set up a temporary outpost near the tree line, not far from a cluster of weather-beaten barns. We were there on routine patrol, rifles slung over our shoulders, the humid night air clinging to us like wet canvas. At first it felt ordinary, just another shift in a war that never truly ended for men like us. But then the crickets stopped chirping. The cicadas fell silent. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. A faint metallic scent drifted on the breeze, sharp and unnatural. Some of the men joked about swamp gas or farm animals, but I could see it in their faces. Something was wrong. Shadows shifted where no light should have reached. That was the night we came face to face with what locals would later call the Hopkinsville Goblins. Before we start, make sure to hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Now, let me take you back to how it all began. I'll start with who we were and why we were there, because none of this makes sense unless you know the kind of men standing in that field. We were a small detachment pulled from a larger unit at Fort Campbell. Not combat, not a big operation, just a quiet assignment that looked simple on paper. The brass called it Rural Stability Patrol. That meant we drove the back roads, checked on farmsteads, and kept an eye out for trespassers near a radio relay that sat on a low hill. Most nights were calm. We knew the names on mailboxes better than the names on our rifles. Our lieutenant was sharp, tall, thin, a straight line kind of man. He spoke like he measured each word before he spent it. We respected him because he didn't waste us, and he didn't ask us to do anything he wouldn't do. The sergeant was Hodge. He was stocky, with a voice like gravel and a laugh that came out of one side of his mouth. Hodge could fix a truck, a torn sleeve, or a bad mood with the same steady hands. There was Lyle, our corporal. He kept the map and the patrol log. He'd fold and refold that map until it sat smooth as a tablecloth in his palm. We had a radio man named Benton, always with the handset on his shoulder. He smoked too much and said it helped him think. Doc Avery was the medic, slow to speak and quick to move, which is the right way around for a medic. Then there were the rest of us: Keegan, who told jokes to cover nerves; Finch, who wrote little notes he never showed anyone; and me. I'd done a tour overseas and came home with a head that stayed too busy at night. This post was supposed to be good for me. Quiet, routine. In late summer of 1955, the day air over western Kentucky felt like warm syrup. By sundown, everything let go: the cattle, the chickens, the dust hanging over the gravel roads. On that particular evening, we parked the jeeps near the tree line by a handful of barns. The wood on those barns had the worn look of a coat washed too many times. A creek ran behind them, lazy and brown. Fireflies came up in little yellow bursts. It was easy to think the world was friendly. The trouble started the week before, in whispers. A farmer said he saw lights in his field. Not headlights, not lanterns. Lights that moved as if they were alive. Another family reported a noise like a generator with the switch half on. Dogs whining, cattle nervous, chickens refusing to roost. None of it was enough for a full alert. Still, the lieutenant logged it, and the colonel passed down a polite order. Increase presence. Provide reassurance, so we did. We set up a small outpost near the barns to be close to the radio relay. 2 tents, a folding table, a lantern, a pot of coffee that tasted like a black boot. The routine was simple. 2 men walked the fence and the creek path, 2 stayed with the jeeps. The rest rotated, cleaning rifles, checking the relay, logging reports, and trying to stay cool. It was simple work until the night breathed wrong. I noticed it first in the way Benton tapped his cigarette on the lantern without looking. He always used the heel of his boot or the rim of his canteen cup. This time he tapped the glass as if he needed the weight of it. Lyle didn't fold the map back up. It stayed open like he was waiting to mark something. And the sergeant, who never worried out loud, said, "Quiet night," in that doubtful way, like a fisherman who sees a smooth surface and knows it means something is moving down below. The sky had no moon we could see. Clouds drifted like thin smoke. You could hear a tractor far off, a faint chug, and a dog barking 2 farms over. Then the crickets dropped off, one by one, like someone was stepping room to room and turning their clocks off. It was not a hard silence. It was a held breath. I've heard quiet in places where quiet meant peace. This wasn't that. I stood near the fence, old wire with crooked posts, and watched a patch of corn shift even though there was no wind. The stalks moved in a circle, then stilled. I told myself it was a raccoon or a stray dog. Nothing to write in the log. "Feel that?" Keegan asked under his breath. "What?" I said. "Smell. Like pennies." I drew air in slow. There it was, a metallic tang, faint but sharp, like a battery tucked under your tongue. It didn't fit. Out here, the smells were sweet hay, diesel, mud, animals. Metal belonged back on post, not in a field after dark. Hodge came over. "We're not spooking ourselves tonight," he said. "Make your rounds. If it's raccoons, we'll escort them to the county line." I grinned because that's what the sergeant wanted me to do. He nodded, pleased, and moved on. Relief is a strange thing. It loosens you for a minute, then leaves you softer than you should be. We got softer. When it was my turn to walk the creek path, I took Finch. He didn't talk unless something needed saying. We followed the trickle of water, watched for snakes in the grass, and checked the little footbridge that creaked even under a child's weight. The trees crowded close there, their branches knitted overhead, and the night felt cool in that tunnel. I could hear the lanterns back at the tents, a dim clink whenever someone set a cup down. "Do you think it's kids messing with us?" Finch asked. "Kids don't turn off crickets," I said. "They don't carry a smell." We found a set of prints in the mud on the far side of the bridge. Not boots, not barefoot. The shape of them was wrong, almost like two small ovals side by side, pressed shallow and neat, spaced too close together for normal steps. I crouched and put my hand next to one. My hand covered it. The mud around the edges looked baked, like something hot had touched it and cooled fast. I didn't like how that felt in my head, so I stood up. "Raccoon?" I said. "Two raccoons?" Finch said, half a joke, and I was grateful for it. We followed the creek back to the fence. Lyle waved us over to the table. The lieutenant had the map open to mark a simple loop. Nothing to write home about. But his finger rested on the little black shape that stood for the relay tower. "Reports say the noise was strongest near the relay," Sharp said. "We'll give it a look." No one argued. We moved as if we'd practiced it. 2 at the jeeps, 2 at the tents, the rest of us to the relay. We crossed the field in a line, careful not to shine lights in each other's faces. The grass brushed our boots. Fireflies blinked on and off as if counting. When we reached the base of the tower, the air went colder. Not a lot, just enough to make our breath feel thick. I put my hand on the metal ladder because I wanted to feel something simple and human. It hummed, not loud, not even sound. More like a soft vibration in the bones of the thing. Benton raised the radio handset to his ear and frowned. "Static," he said, "like someone's whispering and not saying words." The lieutenant listened too. He shook his head once, very slight, as if to tell himself to think straight. "Take a reading," he told Lyle. But we had nothing to read with except our senses and a clock. So we did what soldiers do when we don't have the right tool. We stood with it until it either got better or got worse. It got worse. The cold rose as if the tower was a well, and we were standing in its shadow. The metallic smell came on strong. I could taste it. Hodge tapped the tower with the back of his knuckles. The sound came back flat, like a dead phone line. Then the ground under my right boot gave a little, as if I was standing on a tin roof laid over soft earth. I looked down and saw a round patch where the grass had browned out in a circle the size of a kitchen table. Not from drought. The blades were curled at the tips, as if touched by heat. The soil there felt hard, like it had been sealed. A new worry pushed into my mind. We weren't the first ones to stand on this spot. Back at the tents, a lantern guttered. The light dipped, flared, then thinned until it made a narrow cone, like a flashlight beam drawn through a keyhole. Benton turned his head quickly, like he'd heard a voice, but nobody had spoken. Then Finch whispered, "Look," and pointed past the barns. Something moved along the fence at knee height, quick and smooth. If a child had crawled, you'd see shoulders, elbows, the bump of a back. This shape had a glide to it. It wasn't crawling, it was just there, then farther along, then still. I raised my rifle without meaning to, the way a hand jumps when something hot falls near it. The lieutenant's voice came out steady. "Muzzle down," he said. "Not a shot unless we know what we're shooting." We didn't answer. We watched. The shape paused by a fence post, then rose. I can't say it stood, because that makes you think of a human body unfolding into a human shape. This was more like a hinge you didn't know was there, moving under cloth. It came up light and narrow and too thin for a person. The head, if that's the word, caught the side of the lantern glow. It shone as if wet or metal. Large eyes, round and far apart, took the light and held it. "Costume," Keegan said, which didn't help anyone, but I was grateful for even that flimsy idea. A costume meant a prank, and a prank meant a person, and a person meant rules. The not quite cold air shifted again, blowing from the field toward us. I heard a faint chitter, like iron nails brushed together. The shape tilted its head, slow and wrong, and I felt a pressure in my ears like I'd driven down a mountain too fast. I swallowed and it didn't clear. The lieutenant lifted one hand in a signal none of us had to learn. It was the way a man lifts his hand when he wants his own heart to slow down. We held there, quiet, while the thing at the fence watched us, or listened, or did whatever it did. Then the dog 2 farms over barked again, fast and hard, then yelped, then stopped. The stop was the worst part. Sound should fade. It shouldn't cut off like a wire. Hodge breathed out. "We're going to move back to the tents," he said, calm and even. "Benton, call it in. Low level. Possible trespassers. No shots fired." We began to step back. The shape slid down the fence post as if it had no weight. It went left, fast, toward the creek path, then vanished in the corn. A second later, stalks moved in a ring again. Another shape rose 3 posts down and blinked. It wasn't a blink, not really. The eyes took light and then gave it back, like glass turning its face. "2 raccoons," Finch whispered, giving me the joke again, but his voice shook on the last word. The radio gave a long sigh of static. Benton tapped the side of the set and shook his head. "Dead," he said. His voice was flat, like he'd found a broken watch and reported it as such, but his eyes were wide. We picked up our pace, not a run, not panicked. The field felt longer than before. The tents were too bright for comfort. Light made edges, made shadows. Shadows make places to hide. I caught myself counting men and came up with 8 when there should have been 9, then realized I'd counted myself twice. Back at the table, the lieutenant's hand hovered over the map. He didn't touch it, like the paper belonged to a world we'd stepped out of for a moment. Hodge passed out extra magazines without saying why. We all knew the reason, but none of us wanted to set it in words. The metallic smell grew stronger, then faded, then returned in a wave like heat off a road. It made my mouth taste dry. I took a sip from my canteen. The water had a flat tang to it now, the way water tastes if it's been in a metal cup too long. I capped it and set it down. "Eyes up." "Keep your calm," Sharp said. "We hold here. We wait for the radio to clear. We don't go chasing shadows." I was happy to hear an order that sounded normal. You cling to normal when the floor tilts. Minutes stretched. The lantern hissed. The coffee pot clicked as it cooled. Something tapped the outside of one tent. Light and quick, like a finger. Just one tap, then nothing. I stared at the canvas and waited for a second tap that never came. The first tap is sound. The second would be proof. We never got the second. Keegan leaned close. "If this is a prank, it's a good one." "If it's a prank," I said, "I'll buy the prankster a drink after I break his nose." He smiled, and the smile looked like a man trying to keep a small flame alive in the wind. We heard the creek then, louder than before, though the water hadn't changed. The night pushed sound around like a hand, setting it where it wanted, keeping it from where it didn't. Out beyond the barns, I saw a low glow near the far fence, like foxfire or a cheap toy lamp. It blinked. Another answered it a little closer, then another closer still. We might have stood there all night, halfway convinced, halfway in denial, if not for what happened next. A shape rose at the edge of the field, nearer than before, and another stood beside it, and they did not move like animals or men. Their heads turned in smooth arcs, not jerks or nods, and the eyes held the light the way a mirror holds your face. Lyle lifted his hand to shade his gaze and flinched when his own shadow reached across them on the ground. The shadow bent wrong, as if the earth was slightly domed there, a bubble under the grass. That was when the fear stopped being a draft under the door and became a room we were standing in. We did what trained men do when fear turns into action. We set our feet. We watched each other's angles. We waited for a reason to do more. The reason came from the fence line, where the wire hummed as if plucked by an invisible hand, and a thin, clear sound rose like a note from a glass rim, and the shape stepped toward us with a glide that was not meant for a world with friction. We didn't fire. Not yet. But our fingers found their places, and that's where the night stopped being quiet and started to move toward us, which is where the real trouble began, and how the rising action took hold. The shapes by the fence didn't rush us, not at first. They stood there like watchers, thin and wrong in the lantern light, their eyes taking in everything. We stood across from them, rifles lowered but hands ready. Nobody breathed too loud. Nobody dared speak, not even Keegan. That silence between us stretched long enough to feel like a battle line. Then something changed. The wire along the fence quivered, not with wind, but like it had been touched. A faint hum passed through it, and my teeth ached in my jaw. Benton muttered, "I don't like that sound," and tapped the radio again, but all it gave him was more static. That whispering static crawled into the silence and made the air heavier. The lieutenant finally spoke. "Hold your ground." Calm, firm. That tone he used when he needed us steady. We tried, but the shapes didn't stay at the fence. The first one slid forward, smooth as if its feet barely touched the earth. No sway of shoulders, no weight in its step, just a glide. It covered 10 yards before my eyes even caught up. Then it stopped, and another came behind it, and another. "They're surrounding," Finch whispered. I wanted to tell him not to say it out loud, but he was right. They moved in pairs, never breaking that strange rhythm, circling us like they were closing a net. Sharp raised his hand. "Back to the barns." Slow, tight formation. We did exactly that. The shapes didn't charge, but they moved with us, like shadows keeping pace. Every time we gained 10 feet, they seemed to take 10 too. When we reached the barns, we pressed our backs to the wooden walls. The planks were old and rough, but I welcomed the solid feel. Hodge posted 2 men at each side, rifles up now, because there was no use pretending anymore. We weren't dealing with pranksters. The lantern light cast beams across the field. The eyes caught it, glowing like round mirrors. Dozens of them, more than I had counted before. "God," Keegan muttered, "there's more." He was right. From the corn, from the tree line, even from the creek, more shapes came. Small, thin, all moving with that same glide. It was like the earth itself was giving them up. Then came the sound. Not voices, not cries. A chittering, high-pitched, like nails scratching glass. They all joined in, overlapping until it became one solid noise. It wasn't loud, but it got inside your head. I pressed my teeth together and still felt it buzz in my skull. One of the men, Finch, I think, shouted, "Stay back!" and fired a round into the ground in front of them. The report cracked the air. Smoke curled. The smell of gunpowder broke the metallic stench for a moment. The shapes stopped, all of them, still as posts. Then as one, they tilted their heads to the same angle. Left, like a curious bird. Dozens of pairs of eyes catching the lantern glow. It looked rehearsed, unnatural, wrong. "Christ almighty," Benton muttered. "What are they?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. The lieutenant didn't let the silence hang long. "Inside the barns," he ordered. "Move." We slipped through the side doors, pulling the lanterns with us. Dust rose as we entered. The place smelled of hay, manure, and old oil. Wooden beams crossed overhead. It felt safer, but only by a thread. We set the lanterns on crates and formed a circle. Rifles aimed out toward the open gaps in the walls. Through the cracks, I saw movement, those eyes flashing, heads tilting, thin arms reaching the posts of the barn. And then came the scratching. Light taps at first, like mice. Then longer drags of claw or nail across the wood. Around us on all sides. A slow circling, as if they were testing the walls. Hodge raised his voice steady. "If they come in, you fire. Short bursts. Don't waste." "Copy," we answered near in unison. For a few minutes, that's all it was, the scratching and the silence of men trying not to breathe too fast. My shirt clung to me, damp with sweat. I could hear the pounding of my heart louder than the tapping outside. Then the roof shifted. A creak overhead, dust falling in thin streams. Something had climbed on top. We aimed up uselessly, rifles pointed at the dark rafters. Another creak, then a sound like palms slapping the shingles, skittering across the roof. One of them dropped onto the window ledge, peering in. Its face pressed against the glass, too close, those huge eyes swallowing the lantern light. The skin looked slick, almost silver. Its mouth was a thin slit, moving, though no sound came out. Keegan swore and fired. The glass shattered. The shape fell back. We rushed the opening, weapons raised. Nothing. The thing was gone. Not fallen. Gone. Where? Keegan started, but stopped when the scratching grew louder, angrier now, like dozens of nails raking the wood at once. Then came the pounding, heavy against the doors, not trying to break through, not yet, but letting us know they could. The barn shook with it. The lanterns flickered. "Radio!" Sharp barked. Benton shook his head, face pale. "Still dead. Just whispers." The lieutenant looked at us, one by one, calm, but his eyes betrayed him. He was weighing something he didn't want to say. "We hold until daylight," he said. "If they wanted us dead, they'd have done it already. They're testing us. We give them nothing." So we held. Minutes dragged into hours. The noise never stopped. Sometimes it was the scratching. Sometimes it was a low hum in the wood, like the barn itself was trembling. Sometimes it was the sound of something walking the roof, circling above us. Men shifted, whispered, prayed. Hodge kept making rounds, checking each man, clapping shoulders, steadying hands. He didn't show fear, not once, but I knew he felt it. We all did. At one point, Finch whispered, "They're not leaving." He was right. Through every crack in the wall, eyes still gleamed back at us, waiting, watching. Then around 3 in the morning, by my guess, the pounding stopped. The scratching stopped. Everything stopped. The silence came so sudden, it felt like a trap. "Hold," Sharp said quietly. We did. From the far side of the barn, something slid under the door. Thin, long, like an arm stretched impossibly flat. Fingers, jointed wrong, curling against the dirt floor. Avery, our medic, hissed through his teeth. "Jesus!" The hand clawed forward, reaching. The wood creaked as the rest of it pressed against the gap. I aimed, ready to fire. "Wait," Sharp said. The hand paused. The fingers flexed once, twice, then it withdrew, slow as it came. Silence again. That silence lasted until dawn. We sat there in that circle, rifles aimed outward, lanterns burning low, waiting for something more. But as the sky lightened, the scratching never returned. The eyes in the cracks faded one by one. By sunrise, the field was empty. We stumbled out into the light, exhausted, filthy, but alive. The barn stood the same as before, old wood and rusted nails. The grass stretched wide, wet with morning dew. No tracks, no bodies, no proof. Except the prints by the creek, the circles of burned grass, and the shattered glass of the barn window. Sharp ordered us to log what we saw as trespassers, unidentified. That's what went in the report. Nothing more. Nothing about the eyes or the scratching, or the hand that slid under the door. We broke camp that morning, but none of us felt like the night was over, because we all knew whatever we had faced out there in that field wasn't gone. It had just decided to wait, and it was waiting for us. That's when the story took a darker turn, and the real complications began. We left the barns at dawn, but the morning didn't bring peace. It just gave us a new kind of unease. The field looked the same as always, wet grass, fence wires shining in the low sun, corn stalks swaying lazy in the breeze, but to us it felt changed. Like we'd stepped off a train, and the platform looked normal, but the people standing there weren't really people. None of us said much as we loaded the jeeps. You could see it in the men's faces. They didn't want to talk about the night because putting it into words would make it too real. But silence doesn't erase things. It just leaves them in the air, heavier, waiting. Sharp called us together before we left. He kept his voice even. "Officer, calm. What happened here stays between us. Report reads, Unidentified trespassers, possible prank, possible animals. End of it. We nodded, because what else could we do? Nobody wanted to be the man who tried to explain silver-skinned figures with eyes like lantern glass. Even if we had proof, who would believe it? The brass would laugh us out of uniform. But deep down, we knew this wasn't over. We rolled back toward the relay tower, engines loud in the still air. The tower loomed tall and skeletal, metal catching the sunlight. It looked harmless now, just a piece of equipment. But I remembered how it hummed under my hand the night before, like a live wire running through bone. Hodge stopped the convoy near the base. "We sweep it again," he said. "Then we head in." I walked the dirt around the tower with Finch. We found more circles in the grass, patches browned and curled, the soil underneath hard like clay baked too fast. They weren't random. They lined up, spaced apart like markers. One near the tower, one near the fence, one by the creek. Almost like someone or something was laying out a grid. "Not kids," Finch muttered. "No," I said, "not kids." He crouched, touched the soil, then pulled his hand back quick. "Hot," he said, though the morning was cool. "Still hot." We told Sharp. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the circles, jaw tight, then finally said, "Document it. Don't speculate. We'll let the lab figure it out." But the truth was, none of us believed the lab would ever see it. We knew the paperwork would stop higher up. Too strange, too dangerous to let loose. By afternoon, we were back at Fort Campbell. The colonel called Sharp in for a briefing. We sat outside in the jeep yard, trying to pretend it was any other day. Benton lit cigarette after cigarette until his pack was gone. Keegan tried jokes, but his voice cracked halfway through and he gave up. Avery checked his med kit 3 times like he expected to need it again any second. When Sharp came out, his face told the story. Orders had been handed down, and they weren't what he wanted. "Patrol stands down," he said. "No return to site. We're on base duty until further notice." "Stand down?" Hodge asked. "Sir, with respect, that's the last thing we should do." "They'll come back." Sharp gave him a look that ended the argument. "That's not our call anymore." And that was that, at least officially. But unofficially, the men kept watch. Nights in the barracks, someone would bring it up in whispers. Keegan swore he still smelled that metallic tang on his hands no matter how often he washed. Finch claimed he heard tapping on the windows after lights out, though no one else heard it. Benton said the radio hissed sometimes when it should have been silent, and in the static he thought he heard words his name, whispered and drawn out. We laughed at him, called it nerves. But the laughter was thin. 3 nights later, something happened that stripped away the last of our doubts. I was on motor pool duty with Finch, checking trucks. The sky was overcast, no moon, just that thick dark you only get in the south when the air feels heavy with a storm that won't come. We were halfway through the inspection when the dogs on base started barking. Not just one, all of them. A dozen hounds in the kennels howling at once, frantic, like they wanted out. Then, as suddenly as they started, they stopped. Finch froze, wrench in his hand. "You hear that?" "Too well," I said. Then we saw it. At the far end of the lot, by the wire fence, a glow. Not a flashlight, not headlights. A faint, pulsing light low to the ground, like swamp fire. It moved slow, sliding left to right along the fence line. Then another appeared beside it. Then another. 3 glows, hovering, moving in sync. We backed toward the barracks, rifles slung but hands itching. The glows drew closer, and just as they reached the corner of the lot, they went out. Not faded, snuffed like a candle. We waited, breath tight, but nothing followed. No movement, no sound, just dark. The next morning, the colonel reported a minor security incident in the log. That's all it was on paper. But we knew better. The real twist came when one of the men disappeared. It was Lyle, our map keeper. Quiet, dependable Lyle. One morning, he wasn't at roll call. His bunk was made, his gear stacked neat, but he was gone. No note, no sign of struggle. Search teams combed the base. Dogs sniffed. Nothing. They said maybe he deserted, walked out, but we knew him. Lyle wasn't the type. What stuck with me was his map. They found it in his footlocker, folded as always. But when I opened it, there were fresh marks in pencil circles drawn at the exact spots we'd seen burned patches in the field. The The tower, the fence, the creek, and one more farther out, near a bend in the river none of us had patrolled. That mark was darker, as if he'd traced it over and over. Sharp looked at the map, said nothing, then locked it in his drawer. But that night, Finch told me he dreamed of Lyle. Said he saw him standing in the barn doorway, staring with eyes too big, mouth moving with no sound. He woke up sweating, heart hammering, and swore he could smell that metallic tang in the air. I wanted to call it fear playing tricks, but part of me wondered if Lyle had been taken, changed, maybe even turned into one of those things we saw. And that thought stuck in my head worse than any dream. After Lyle vanished, Sharp grew different. He kept us close. No more night patrols, but his eyes darted at shadows. Sometimes I caught him staring at the horizon, like he expected something to rise out of it. Then one evening, he pulled me aside. "You were the first to notice the prints by the creek," he said. "The first to smell it. I need you to stay sharp. If anything happens again, we act on our own. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Because command will bury this," he added, "but it won't bury us." That was the moment I knew our own officer no longer trusted the chain of command. We were on our own. The real breaking point came 2 nights later. We were in the barracks when the power went out. Not just lights, everything. Fans, radios, even the backup generator dead. The dark slammed down heavy, then the tapping started. On the windows, on the walls, soft at first, then harder, faster. The same sound from the barns. We scrambled, rifles up, forming a circle in the center of the room. The windows rattled. The tapping grew frantic. And then came the glow seeping under the cracks in the door, pale and shifting, like the light itself was alive. Keegan shouted, "They're here!" Sharp barked, "Hold!" But the door hinges groaned, the metal bending inward as if pressed by invisible hands. We braced it with bunks, shoulders, anything we had. Sweat ran into my eyes. The glow grew brighter, filling every crack, searing white against the dark. And then silence, just like that. The power returned with a snap. Lights blazed. Fans whirred. The glow vanished. The door stood solid again. No sign it had bent, but we knew it had. We felt it in our bones. That night, none of us slept. We sat in silence, rifles across our laps, waiting. By dawn, we realized something clear. This wasn't random. They weren't just watching or testing. They were escalating. And whatever they wanted, they weren't finished with us yet. That was the turning point. The moment fear turned to certainty. The war we thought we'd left behind overseas had followed us home. Only this enemy wasn't human, and soon we'd have to face it head on. The night it all came to a head didn't feel different at first. That was the worst part. If you've ever been on watch, you know sometimes you can sense when something's brewing. The wind carries it. The insects act strange. The dogs stir. But this night, nothing gave us warning. The air was cool, quiet. The motor pool sat in neat rows, jeeps gleaming faintly in the starlight. Somewhere far off, a freight train wailed. That kind of sound usually calms a soldier. Makes you think the world outside still ticks along. But for us, the calm felt fake. Sharp had us running checks again, even though command said, "Stand down." He didn't care. Not after Lyle. He put us in 3-man teams, one at the barracks, one near the radio hut, one by the tower. Hodge stayed with the jeeps, keeping the engine warm on one in case we had to move fast. I drew the tower watch with Finch and Benton. We settled into our post, rifles ready, lantern dimmed low. I leaned against the ladder, listening to the faint buzz of Benton's radio. Static, always static. He adjusted the dial like he was nervous, though he knew it wouldn't clear. "Feels quiet," Finch muttered. "Too quiet," Benton said. He grinned, but it was hollow. I didn't answer. My eyes were on the field. That's when I noticed the glow. At first, just a shimmer on the horizon, like heat waves, except it was night and cool. Then slowly points of light blinked into view. Dozens, not steady like lanterns or fires, flickering, moving, almost breathing. They stretched in a line far as I could see, spreading out across the field. "They're here," I whispered. Benton leaned forward, radio pressed to his ear. The static had changed. It wasn't just hiss now. It had rhythm, a pulse, then faint, a voice. Not English, not words I knew, but it spoke in time with the lights, like the field was talking through his handset. He ripped it off his shoulder, face pale. "Lieutenant needs to hear this." Before we could move, the fence line shook. The post rattled, wire humming like a plucked string. And then they came. Figures rose out of the glow, sliding across the grass. Not running, not walking, just gliding, same as before. But this time there weren't a handful. There were dozens, maybe more. Their heads tilted in unison, eyes glinting silver, catching every bit of starlight. "God help us," Finch muttered. We called it in, voices sharp. Within minutes, Sharp and the rest were with us. Keegan, Avery, Hodge, all rifles raised, faces tight. The lieutenant didn't waste words. He looked across that field, jaw hard, and said, "Positions! Hold the line." And that was it. The first one came within 20 yards, then stopped. Its arms hung low, too long for its body, fingers thin as sticks. The slit of its mouth opened, closed, though no sound came out. Then a second joined it, then a third. They stood in a row watching us, heads tilting one after another, like a wave. That chittering started, high-pitched glass scrape sharp. It came from every direction, overlapping until it drilled straight into the skull. My teeth buzzed, my vision swam. Sharp shouted over it, "Hold!" But then the light surged. All at once the glow brightened, spilling across the grass, bathing everything in pale silver. My shadow stretched long, warped, bending in directions it shouldn't, and the figures moved, fast. They glided in from the fence, from the creek, from behind the tower, surrounding, closing. "Fire!" Sharp barked. Rifles cracked in the night. Muzzle flashes lit our faces, the air filled with the smell of powder. I fired burst after burst, rounds slamming into those thin bodies. Some staggered back, dropping low, almost folding into the earth. But they didn't fall like men. No cries, no blood, just jerks, shudders, then sliding back upright as if nothing hit them. "They're not dropping," Keegan shouted. "Keep firing," Hodge barked. We did. The noise was deafening. Spent casings rattled at our boots. The shapes swayed and shimmered, some vanishing in the flash, others sliding closer through the smoke. One darted past the fence, so fast it blurred. Avery swung his rifle and hit it point blank. The shot tore through it and it dissolved into light, gone in an instant, leaving only the smell of hot metal. "What the hell? Stay tight!" Sharp cut him off. But they kept coming. For every one that vanished, two more seemed to rise from the glow. They moved through the grass like water pouring downhill. No sound of steps, no weight, just motion. Then the tower began to hum, louder than before, deep enough to vibrate in my chest. The metal shook, bolts rattled loose. The air around it shimmered, bending, like heat rising off asphalt. "They're feeding off it," Benton shouted, voice cracking. "The tower, it's..." He didn't finish. A shape darted at him, fast, too fast. It leapt, hands stretching, fingers curling around his shoulder. He screamed. His body convulsed, jerking like a man wired to a generator. His rifle fell from his grip. I fired at the thing, point blank. The round ripped through its chest. It flickered, shrieked, not with sound, but with a pressure that burst in my ears and vanished. Benton collapsed in the dirt, smoke rising faint from his uniform. His eyes rolled back, chest heaving shallow. "Avery!" Sharp barked. The medic dove to Benton, dragging him back, but the shapes pressed closer. Too many, closing in from every side. Sharp made the call. "Fall back to the jeeps! Move!" We broke formation, sprinting for the motor pool. Rifles barked behind us, covering fire. Shapes glided fast at our heels, arms stretching, fingers clawing. One leapt for Keegan. He spun, slammed his bayonet forward, and the thing shrieked before dissolving like smoke and wind. We reached the jeeps, engines already running thanks to Hodge. Men piled in. I shoved Benton into the back, Avery climbing with him. Sharp took the front seat, Hodge behind the wheel. "Go!" he roared. The jeeps tore forward, bouncing over the dirt. Headlights cut the night, beams slicing across the field. For a second, I thought we'd made it. Then they came out of the corn. Figures burst from the rows, eyes glowing, bodies gliding at impossible speed. They flanked us, closing from both sides. The jeeps roared, but the shapes kept pace, skimming the ground like shadows alive. One slammed into the side, rocking the vehicle. Another clawed at the windshield, leaving streaks that smoked as if burning the glass. We fired from the backs, rounds flashing, faces lit by muzzle bursts. Shapes exploded into light, but more filled the gaps. The chittering rose shrill, drilling through bone. Ahead, the fence loomed. Hodge gunned the jeep, crashing through posts, wire snapping around us. Sparks flew. The shapes scattered, then regrouped, chasing. The road opened, gravel spitting under the wheels. For miles they followed. Always there, glowing, gliding, never tiring. Then suddenly they stopped. One moment they were at our flanks, the next they were gone. The glow faded, swallowed back into the fields. The chittering cut off like a switch. Silence, sudden and heavy. We didn't slow until the base lights came into view. The jeeps roared through the gate, brakes screaming. Men jumped out, gasping, rifles still raised at shadows. Benton lay limp, chest rising shallow. Avery worked fast, hands steady, but his face pale. We'd survived, barely. But as I stood there, sweat dripping, lungs burning, I knew something. That wasn't a victory. It was a warning. They had let us go, and whatever those things were, they weren't finished. Not with us, not with the base, maybe not with anyone. That night marked the end of pretending. The brass could bury reports, scrub logs, laugh off witnesses, but for us, the war had just entered a new kind of battlefield, one we'd never trained for. And the worst was still coming. When the jeep skidded to a stop inside the gates of Fort Campbell, we looked like men coming back from war, not a patrol in our own country. Mud splattered our uniforms, faces pale, hands shaking on rifles that still smoked. Benton lay half-conscious in the back, his body twitching every so often like something inside him hadn't settled. The MPs ran over, asking questions, but Sharp cut them off. "Medical first," he said, his voice hard. Avery rushed Benton to the infirmary, and the rest of us stood there in the motor pool, engines ticking as they cooled, unable to speak. Inside my chest, my heart still hammered. My ears rang from the shooting and from that awful chittering sound that seemed to linger long after it ended. I kept watching the fields beyond the fence, half expecting those glowing eyes to appear again. They didn't. The colonel called us in before sunrise. His office smelled of coffee and stale smoke. He sat behind his desk, clean uniform, calm face. Too calm. He listened to Sharp's report, every word clipped and precise. But when it was over, the colonel just shook his head. "Unidentified aggressors," he said, scribbling notes. "Possibly a group of men in disguise. Locals, maybe hostile. That's what we'll put in the record." Hodge bristled. "With respect, sir, that's not what happened. Those things weren't men. They weren't." "That's enough, Sergeant," the colonel snapped. "Orders are clear. No mention of lights. No mention of creatures. Report reads as trespassers, unknown number, disguised. End of matter." The room went dead quiet. We all understood what that meant. The Army didn't want the truth. Maybe couldn't handle it. Maybe already knew more than we did and wanted it buried. When he dismissed us, the colonel leaned forward, voice low. "This incident never happened. If I hear otherwise, you'll answer for it." That was the cover-up, simple as that. Benton didn't recover like we hoped. He lived, but he wasn't the same. His skin stayed pale, eyes wide and hollow, as if he'd been burned from the inside. The doctors called it electrical shock trauma, though none of us believed that. He spoke little, and when he did, it was nonsense broken words, whispers about the lights in the grid. They transferred him to a hospital out of state a week later. We never saw him again. The rest of us stayed on base. No more patrols, no more barns or towers. Days bled into each other, drills, chores, cleaning rifles that already gleamed. On the surface, everything was normal, but none of us were the same. Keegan stopped telling jokes. Finch kept staring at the horizon like he expected those figures to come gliding out at any moment. Hodge smoked more than ever, his laugh gone. Avery treated Benton's empty bunk like it was still occupied, leaving it neat, as if the man might walk back in. As for Sharp, he grew harder. He carried himself like a man on trial, eyes sharp, jaw tight. He didn't argue with the colonel again, but you could tell he hated the silence forced on us. One night, sitting outside the barracks, he spoke to me. "You understand, don't you?" he asked. "Understand what, sir?" "They'll come back. Maybe not here, maybe not for us, but somewhere. And the ones above us, they'll pretend it isn't happening until it's too late." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We both knew he was right. Weeks passed, no more sightings, no more lights. The fields around Hopkinsville went quiet again. Farmers still muttered about strange noises, animals spooked, shadows in the trees, but those reports never reached us, not officially. Then one morning, Sharp called us into the mess hall. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "This unit is finished," he said. "We're being split. Transfers, different posts, different states. They want us scattered." Nobody spoke. We all knew why. Split us up, and the story dies. Men alone are easy to silence. A unit together can't be ignored. We didn't fight it. What choice did we have? Orders are orders. That night before the trucks came, we sat around the barracks in silence. No drinks, no cards, just silence. Each of us carried the same weight. We'd seen something no man should, and we couldn't share it. Not with the brass, not with the outside world, not even with our families. That was the aftermath. Not victory, not defeat, just silence. When I left Fort Campbell, I carried only my duffel and my rifle. But I also carried the memory of those eyes glowing in the dark, the smell of metal in the air, the hum of the tower under my hand. Those things never left. Even now, decades later, I still wake some nights with that chittering in my ears. I still see Benton convulsing under that creature's grip. I still hear Sharp's voice telling me the army would bury the truth. And they did. History books don't mention it. Official records call it trespassers, pranksters, or just local hysteria. But I was there. We all were. We saw what came out of those fields. And the worst part? I don't think it was the first time. Those circles in the grass, those grids, they weren't random. They were a map, a plan. Maybe Hopkinsville was just one piece. When I talk about it now, people ask why we didn't fight harder, why we didn't force the truth out, but they don't understand the weight of silence in the military. Orders chain you down heavier than iron, and fear keeps you quiet longer than orders ever will. But silence doesn't erase the truth. We stood against something that wasn't human. We fought it, barely survived it, and watched it vanish into the dark. And we were told to forget. I haven't forgotten. None of us who lived it ever did. That was our war at home, not in the jungles, not across the ocean, but here in the fields of Kentucky, under the stars, where something watched us from the dark and let us live only because it chose to. That was the aftermath. And though the reports buried it, I carry the memory, because I know someday someone else will see those eyes. And when they do, I pray they're ready. I'm an old man now. My hair's gone white, my hands don't hold steady like they used to, and the army I served in belongs to another time. But some memories stay sharper than any blade, no matter how many years pass. That night outside Hopkinsville is one of them. Most soldiers tell war stories about firefights, or brothers lost, or the weight of carrying a rifle far from home. My story is different. My war came in a field on American soil against something no manual could prepare me for. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. When they split us up, I thought time would dull it. I figured if I worked, raised a family, kept my head down, the nights would stop haunting me. But silence doesn't cure the kind of fear we saw. It just makes it grow quieter, deeper, like roots under the ground. I still see it clear, the way the grass curled in those perfect circles, the silver glow of those eyes at the fence line, the way Benton shook when that thing's hand gripped him, and worst of all, the silence after. The way command stamped it out, swept it under the rug like it was nothing. I've come to realize the cover-up was almost worse than the encounter. You expect enemies in war. You expect danger. What you don't expect is to be told your own eyes lied to you, that the thing you fought didn't happen. That's a wound that doesn't heal. Some nights I still wake to that high-pitched chittering. I'll sit up in bed, heart racing, ears straining in the dark. Most times it's nothing but memory, but there have been nights I'd swear I see a glow through the trees behind my house. Too faint to be a lamp, too steady to be fireflies. Maybe it's just age. Maybe it's just guilt. Or maybe they never left. I think about Lyle sometimes, his empty bunk, the circles drawn on his map. He knew something more. Maybe he saw patterns the rest of us didn't. Maybe he followed them. I'll never know. And Benton, wherever they send him, whatever became of him, part of me believes he carried something from that night inside him. Not just scars, something else. Something not meant for a man to carry. The Army will never admit it. The history books won't write it. But men like me, we carry the truth quietly. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the truth lives on in the telling, even if only a few hear it. Now, I'm not sharing this for sympathy or to scare anyone. I'm sharing it because I know how soldiers talk. Stories passed down in barracks, in bars, in quiet corners of the world. And if you're listening now, maybe one day you'll be the one to tell it forward. Because whatever those things were, they weren't finished. Hopkinsville wasn't the start, and it sure as hell wasn't the end. Maybe it was just one night in a long chain, a test, a reminder, a warning, and warnings matter. That's why I speak now, after all these years, not to prove anything, not to change the record, just so someone out there knows. If the night ever goes still, if the crickets fall silent, if the air turns sharp like pennies on your tongue, be ready. Stay together. Don't let fear scatter you. We faced something not of this world, and we lived only because it let us. I'll never know why. But I do know this. It could happen again. To any unit, any place, any night. This is my last testimony, the only war story I've never written down in ink. My children don't know it. My grandchildren wouldn't believe it. But you, if you've stayed with me this far, you've carried it now too. So if you ever hear about the Hopkinsville Goblins, don't laugh it off as folklore or small-town legend. Remember this old soldier's words. I was there. I saw them. We fought. We survived. And survival in that kind of war is victory enough. Don't turn off the light now. If the story chilled you, subscribe to Blackout War Stories. And for more horror, the next nightmares are waiting on your screen.